夠鐘又夠人啦，咁我哋開會啦。
Good morning. We have a quorum and it's time. First item for agenda, information documents issued since last time. The report on the school-based management policies. This is an information document. The Education Bureau hasn't asked for the document to be discussed, but if we wish to, we can put it on the agenda. Next, Mr. Cheung Kwok-kwan on the 1st of June concerning the letter he issued, a letter on the curriculum material for schools, kindergartens and primary and secondary schools. Now, Mr. Cheung, on the 3rd of January at the education panel, we decided that we will convene the working group. There were 2 meetings, but we haven't yet come to the nomination stage. Now, at the last time, the question was asked of Mr. Leung, who chaired the meeting, whether there would be a specific timetable. He said there wouldn't be. So before the end of the current session of LegCo, we may not be able to begin the substantial work. Now, to avoid confusion, I must clarify my stance. Now, on Mr. Leung's performance in chairing the meeting, I don't really have confidence. But I hope that he can continue with the work of electing the chairman. But we can't leave the matter to its own fate before the end of the session. Now, since the working group cannot start its work, it cannot elect a chairman, now we must hold a special meeting within the education panel to carry out this work so that we can account to the public before the end of the session. Now, the secretary has arranged for meeting time for the next meeting. Now, but I agree, we probably won't be able to elect a chairman by the end of July. I don't know why the candidates have to provide some sort of manifesto. I don't think we are entering direct election, so I agree there should be a separate meeting. Helena Wong, I'm against that. Now, we have passed the initiative that we should have follow-up process for the teaching materials. Now, since we have set up a working group, it should be left for the working group to discuss it. Now, so we shouldn't have a separate meeting to discuss the matter in parallel. Now, as for whether another working group meeting could resolve the issue, I know we all know that it can't be resolved because the LegCo work will be completed in the middle of July. So it's just unfortunate that we cannot conclude this. Now, if we can do it later. Now, for special committee meeting, there are plenty of special committee meetings that should be held. Now, for instance, the school-based management policies. We don't even have a document for that. Now, we don't have a document for this teaching material matter, so I think we don't have an explanation for that solution. Now, as I said, the Education Bureau only provided a slim document. I don't think that's adequate. Now, anyone wishes to speak? Priscilla Leung, Chen Wing-shun, Mr. Shiu, Mr. Cheung, Ms. Mo, and Mr. Yip, Vice Chairman. 2 minutes each. Now, our education system is faulty in many ways. We shouldn't divide it along lines of pro-democrats and pro-establishment. Now, we should focus on the serious educational problems. Over the years, we have received from many parents their complaints about the teaching materials and the textbooks, etc., all the way down to kindergarten. They tend to nurture hate. This wouldn't be beneficial for the growth of our younger generation. Now, given the experience of our election of chairman for the House Committee, we don't stand much chance of resolving the election of chairmanship for this working group. So we should decide this decisively. Now, the education panel can fulfill this role so that the parents and the public can have their views expressed through us. Chen Wing-shun, I agree with Mr. Mr. Cheung Kwok-kwan and Madam Chairman. Now, we have received many expressions of concern and doubt about the teaching materials and textbooks, etc., of primary and secondary schools, etc. So we must have a working group now, but we can't even elect the chairman. There were 2 meetings, and it still hasn't been done, and we all know it can't be done. So I hope that in the education panel we should hold a special meeting for that. I don't agree there's no urgency. Since there's concern in society, let's discuss the contents of the textbooks. Maybe there's no problem. Maybe they can explain it professionally. They can come and explain to us. And the Education Bureau can also explain to us how they vet the procedure so that we can allay the concerns of the parents. Now, we all tend to trust the schools and the teachers, but now the parents are worried, so there is urgency. Mr. Hsu Ka-chun, to resolve the concerns of Mr. Cheng and Ms. Priscilla Leung. Now, we should adjust our agenda. We should have a session on the textbooks. Now, we have established a subcommittee, and then we say the chairman cannot be elected, so we have to take his place, and we have to hold a meeting by the education panel to elect the chairman. I think this is inappropriate procedurally. Now, Mr. Cheung commented on Mr. Leung Yu-chung's chairmanship. Now, when he reiterated his stance, he said that he has no confidence in the ability of Mr. Leung to act as chairman. I think this is inappropriate. Now, I think we shouldn't talk about the ability of other members in this way. We should respect the chairman. Now, Mr. Cheung said that Mr. Leung claimed there's no timetable. I don't remember that. Now, our colleagues kept asking him whether there's timetable, and he said, we are doing it right now. We are coming to parts 3 and 4. This is progressing. Now, what date are you expecting? So people may have different understandings about a timetable, but that doesn't mean there's no timetable. Dr. Fernando Cheung. Madam Chairman, I'm against Mr. Cheung Kwok-kwan's proposal, and I think that this is committee to study the drawing up of textbooks and teaching materials for discussing the monitoring and related matters in relation to the drawing up of teaching materials for kindergartens, secondary and primary schools.
Chairman, now I feel that for monitoring and establishment, the government has long-running procedures. And at the moment, the teaching materials do not really require us, LegCo, setting up a committee to monitor the use of such materials. Now, if there are individual textbooks or materials becoming problematic, we can deal with that using existing channels. That's no big deal. Now, why do we have to interfere with kindergartens, secondary schools and primary schools and look at how teachers use or produce the teaching materials? That's not suitable. We certainly don't need another such committee. Now, maybe you have a political agenda. I don't really want to deal with that here. You can do it outside this chamber. We should not use resources of LegCo to, extend our political arm into the schools and the school children. Madam Mo, now for Mr. Cheung Kwok-kwan's point that he has no confidence in Mr. Leung Yiu-chung in chairing the meeting, I think this is really trivial. I mean, so what? I mean, I am not confident with Mr. Leung Kwan-yin as chairman. I mean, having said that, what use does it make? Now, we have such a thing as a dual process. We have a proper procedure. And you only say that, okay, you as chairman also object to that. And you feel that as a chairman, you don't need to have a political platform because you're not taking part in an election. Now, if you are going to take part in direct election, you need a platform. Well, but not necessarily, because you may join using functional constituencies. Now, I really don't think that we need this particular committee. Now, I think you've twisted what I said, so you can clarify. Maybe I misunderstood you. Now, you say that there's an urgency. Well, I don't really think so, because some parents write to the Education Bureau complaining about the IT contents not being suitable. And then there are, officials from the Bureau going to the schools. And then you have the right channel to lodge your complaints. Now, some parents say to me that some of the English questions set are wrong. And I looked at it, it's not really wrong. It is okay. And you can comfort or console the parents. The children will not be learning wrong English. It's not entirely wrong. Okay, maybe there's a better way to say it, but it's not wrong. So it's not urgent at all. And Mr. Ip Kin Yoon. Now, we already have a committee to deal with this. And if we set up another meeting, that would be redundant. And I really don't think we need to do that. Now, secondly, within our committee, there are many education issues worth discussing. Now, we are now nearing the end of the LegCo term, And there are so many items on the agenda that we could discuss. I mean, how urgent is this particular issue? And how meaningful is it? Now, for textbooks and teaching materials, if we feel that it's problematic, there are channels to deal with that. So I don't really see the urgency here. Now, we can actually discuss the Finland study tour, and we have a delegation looking forward to have a discussion. At first, we have only been assigned a very small amount of time. Now, I believe such items are plentiful, so I don't understand why we need to discuss textbooks and teaching materials. So my point is, we do not need a whole dedicated meeting to discuss this. Thank you. Okay, I'll just say a few things. Now, I feel it is urgent because I receive complaints from parents sending me materials that those materials are not factual and stimulate hatred, and parents are worried. Second, now when we discussed this, Mr. Kevin Young was here, and the Bureau could not really scrutinize so much materials, and the general education is not compulsory for vetting. And then teachers can produce worksheets and then download news and so on. So Mr. Young cannot monitor everything. So we receive a lot of complaints from parents, and even some book publishers complain, and then they have school-based teaching materials and something that may actually infringe textbook copyrights. And I'm also very concerned about now on general education. Hong Kong already has a tripartite form of government, which is entirely wrong. And I don't know how textbooks can produce such wrong concepts. Now, I don't object to the Finland study tour. I have my views too. But since now, if we cannot have chairman in the short run, I think we need to discuss textbooks. Now, do you want to put the issue to a vote, Mr. Cheung? Yes, please. So let's have the bell. Chair, Mr. Cheung Kwok-kwan wrote to suggest that we discuss this in our meeting. I don't understand why we need to put it to a vote. Now, if every one of us writes to you and then you put it to the vote, I don't think that's necessary. Well, that depends on whether individual members have such requests. Now, I can actually use circulation to ask you whether you want to have that. Well, it's not a motion. It's just a letter. Well, the motion is whether we agree to having a special meeting. Now, who raised that motion? Who moved the motion? Is it you, Chair? It is Mr. Cheung, and he already has a letter. I find this rather strange that you handle it like this, Ms. Chan. Now, if members have different views, I think we're just putting it to the vote to see whether we want this meeting. So some object, some agree. So this is putting it to the vote to see whether we would have this special meeting. Now, I think it is quite okay. I mean, otherwise we'll be here a whole day. And then if the answer is yes, then we can arrange such a meeting. Now, I don't want to waste everybody's time. I just want to indicate whether we want that meeting or not. Thank you. Ms. Mo? Thank you, Chair. Now, I am a little bit confused. Let's ask our Secretary and our legal advisor to see whether this is indeed appropriate. Now, I don't suspect why you want to put it to the vote to make a decision, but procedurally, it is problematic because nobody is moving a motion and you simply ask that person whether you want to put it to the vote. Well, maybe you should ask Mr. Cheung or you should ask me. I mean, who moved the motion and what is it that you are abstaining from, supporting or objecting? Mr. Cheung Kwok-kwan. As to whether we have a special meeting, I think the chair can decide after listening to different views, and you think that there are two different views, and you ask me, and since we have different views, so the best thing is to put it to the vote. Now, if the opposing party thinks that this is not acceptable, then we can pass the decision to the chair. Ms. Wong, I've pointed out about procedural justice. Now, I think we should ask the legal advisor, now, because we already have this committee looking at textbooks and teaching materials, and at the same time, you want to arrange another meeting. So, is it against the procedures? Now, if that is the case, I think the LA should explain to us. Now, because we've arranged other meetings, now, unless Mr. Cheung Kwok-kwan agrees that we should, cancel the work of this committee and then replace it with another committee. I mean, otherwise, I think we will be having two parallel such committees. Now, I don't think there's any legal issues here, Ms. Mack. Now, if members do not want to put it to the vote, then Chair, you can decide. Okay, so let's not vote and then let the chairman decide. And you can talk about teaching materials or other things. Okay, now, Mr. Cheung doesn't say that Mr. Leung is not allowed to chair the meeting. You can continue and you can elect chairman, and if you fail to do that by July, then that would be the end of it. Now, but today we have an item as to whether we should have a meeting to discuss this. So I'm asking for your views so we can decide, or I can decide. I'd like to know your views. Now, if you are in favor, please cast your vote. And if you object, you can also refrain from casting a vote. The vote is whether or not to have a special meeting to look at textbooks and teaching materials. So let's start the voting. Mr. Chan, please be courteous. Please start voting. Whether we should have another meeting to discuss teaching materials and textbooks. Let us not waste any time. If you want to vote, you vote. Mr. Cheung Kwok-kwan, can you please write that down? Chair, this is not really a motion, it's just a suggestion. I can read it out And that is, I suggest the chairman call a special meeting to look at the work of, or look at the teaching materials and the textbooks, and we put it to the vote.
If you are supportive, please cast your vote.
主席啊，
Chairman, they are being unreasonable. Just now they said they want a written or a verbal version put into words. So this is meaningless argument. Now I have to make a ruling. Those in favor for a special meeting to discuss textbooks and teaching materials, please raise your hand. Will you press the bell? Now, raising your hand and putting up your hand and pushing, pressing on the button are the same. I ask you to raise your hand if you wish to vote in support. If you like to raise your hand, if you wish to press the button, it's up to you. Now, I'm being democratic, but you are not satisfied. So we'll just raise our hands. Those in favor, please raise the hands. The Secretariat will note the list of supporters. Now, you're not pressing the button. I've waited for so long. Those against holding the meeting, please raise your hand. The meeting to discuss textbooks and teaching materials. A special meeting. Please don't always ask for the legal advisor to explain.
Some個章程
12-4. 12-4. 12 against. So I will reconsider. So including me, that's 13 then. I can. $13 including me. We come to agenda item number 2. Please, quiet please. Now, if the chairman is to vote, she would be voting against it. Now that's wrong. The guidelines for the chairman says, now please read that section in the guideline for the chairman. The section 3.31, chairman's right to vote, Alice Mack. for the first vote, the chairman can vote. The casting vote is now after the first vote, then you can have the casting vote. And the chairman, can you deal with the order issue? Now, people are shouting in their seats, so we can't hear each other. Guideline 3.31, the chairman or the member chairing the meeting has the does not have the casting vote, but can have the vote. Now, I have not voted. I will not vote, but as I said, I can vote. Has the right to vote. Now, Mr. Yip said that I had no right to vote, so that's why I explained. If I understand correctly, the chairman said she has the right to vote in the first time. Now, that seems to be the case from the guidelines, so that means the motion has not been passed, so it's 12 against 12. So we come to next item of agenda. It was not passed. Matters to be discussed at the next meeting. Now, the matters for agenda have been given to you. Now we come to the third item of agenda, the revamp of the Committee on Self-Financing Post-Secondary Education and the proposed enhancement and startup grant scheme for self-financing post-secondary education. We ask the Education Bureau colleagues to join us.
楊局長，
Mr. Young, please walk us through the document. Now I will talk about the revamp of the committee and seek your views on the proposal to give honoraria to non-local members, and also to talk about the proposed enhancement and startup grant scheme. Now, the Professor Anthony Cheung chaired the task force on review of self-financing post-secondary education. Last November, the Education Bureau has revamped the Committee on Self-Financing Post-Secondary Education so that it's on a par with the University Grants Committee. It has to undertake new work, including the coordinating the self-financing post-secondary education sector and so on. Now, we will invite more persons from outside the sector to join us, and we will have 2 non-local members so that we can benefit from the international perspective. Now, we propose to offer the same terms and honoraria for non-official members. They can receive honoraria of $215 per meeting. And for non-local member, there would be honoraria of $165,400, same as for University Grants Committee. And we also want to take forward the enhancement and startup grant scheme for self-financing post-secondary education so that we can offer expensive non-degree, sub-degree and degree self-financing courses. Now, you can press the button if you wish to speak. Now, we know that people have been pressing the buttons before the officials come in. Now, you should announce. You shouldn't just remind us. please press the button at any time. There are already 6 members who are in the queue to ask questions, including me. I don't have precedence over you, Ms. Mo. Will the secretary please resume? How long will it take? Just a short while, so that these institutions can provide a better curriculum, and this will be a funding of $1.26 billion. This will benefit independent educational institutions. The document has listed the detailed procedures, application procedures, the eligibility criteria, and so on. Now, there is $42 million upper limit per project, but if it goes above that, then it would be considered on a case-by-case basis. There's a committee on support measures who would offer its views to the Education Bureau. We hope that the scheme can start receiving applications by the end of this year. We hope that members can support these 2 proposals so that we can receive the funding from Finance Committee soon. 9 members have expressed a wish to speak. We have 2 more items of agenda, the international schools and the Finland duty visit. So if there are no more pressing of buttons, 4 minutes each then. Chen Ying. Now, I'd like to ask about the standards for the honoraria for non-local members. Why is it that the government stipulated at first that there's no honoraria for non-local members, but only for local members? Was it an oversight? Now, although the level of criteria of honoraria is the same as for UGC, have you compared whether this amount, $165,400, is high or low compared with overseas? And these members have to come to Hong Kong for 2 or 3 meetings a year. And there would be 2 or 3 subcommittee meetings, and every time there would be travel and hotel expenses. Now, would this be covered under the honoraria, or they would be able to claim those separately? Now, if it's approved, this would be retroactive from 1st of November last year. But even if we approve this today, this still has to queue up in Finance Committee. We know that there's a traffic jam in the Finance Committee. Now, if by the end of this session the Finance Committee still hasn't approved the funding, then we may have to wait till the end of this year. So the process may take over 1 year. Now, would this be very unfair for the non-local members? They would receive the money so late. The Secretary, several questions. Now, in the past, there is no honoraria arrangement. We just find some local experts and people from the community to offer us their views. And in our strategy, we hope that the self-financing post-secondary sector and the should be upgraded to the same level as for the publicly funded post-secondary post-secondary education sector. So we offer $215 to non-official members, local members, the same as in UGC, and we offer the same criteria the same honoraria as in the UGC for the non-local members as well. Now, as for the occasions when they come to attend meetings, the expenses, we'll arrange for that. The Secretariat of the committee would arrange for them air tickets and hotel bookings, so it's paid for by us separately. Now, as for the $165,400, whether that's too much or too little, now, given our experience in the UGC, now when we discuss this with experts overseas, we get the impression this is broadly acceptable. This is not a purchase of a service. This is just to show our sincerity. Now, these are maybe university chancellors, or so they are not that concerned. They will know that they can get the money soon enough.
咧其實改
Now, Chair, now after the revamping, the CSPE will have some sort of a quality control committee, and this can help to monitor the use of materials. And of course, we want to increase the recognition. And of course, it is good to have such a committee. But then we have to clarify the role between the CSPE and the UGC. So can I ask about the relationship and division of labor between the CSPE, UGC, and the HKCA AVQ, and how to ensure that the quality between UGC-funded and self-financing programs do not differ too much in terms of quality. Now, on the startup grant and self-financing post-secondary education, they have to continue for double the time of the double the years of the approved project period. Now, how do you ensure that? So this is, again, has to do with the quality. Now, because the CSPE will look at various factors to ensure that the programs or the suggestions can be approved. Now, will you also look at the future employers, whether they are happy with the recruits they have and whether the skills they have are suitable? And also when they come to professional accreditation, whether these graduates, after taking the program, can have continuous and comprehensive kind of quality assurance. Now, after applying for our funds, we will of course ask the self-financing bodies to give us suggestions and proposals. And then that will answer questions on professional accreditation and how employers look at the need of such graduates. Now, when we look at those documents, the support measure committee will look at such committees, such proposals, and we are able to look at the QA and to see how that align with the organization's rationale, and also whether this is long-term viable. Now, the funding we are proposing is that for certain programs, when it comes to the starting up stage, they need more funding at the upfront stage. So later on, the fees they charge can be more affordable, and to ensure a smooth, continuous running of such programs. Now, on quality assurance, we will work with HKCA VQ, and also we will have exchanges with the UGC to ensure that the whole education sector is increasing its quality to meet the growing needs of society. Dr. Wong, now I am quite concerned about the quality and the monitoring of the self-financing bodies. Now, I don't have strong views about the funding, but I'd like to ask Mr. Yeung. Now, regarding CAP 320 and CAP 279, when will these caps be reviewed or adjusted? Because we're using public funding to help these institutions. Now, the governance of the education unit, colleges and so on, and the various participants, stakeholders, alumni and so on, this is all matters of concern. And if it is run like a family business, this can give rise to a lot of complaints. And I've handled some of them myself. Now, how do we amend the legislation, the two caps, to ensure that the governance is up to par and that the governance is democratic and transparency in the finances? Because some programs are money-making, so we need to have a transparent look at the books. Mr. Yeung, now under CAP 320, now regarding its review or amendment, now we understand that the CSPE already made some proposals and that they would start some sort of consultation within 1 or 2 months. And by the next financial year, we can have some proposed amendments for LegCo to consider. And we still have some time for that. Now, so let's work on the major principles, and we have to discuss this with the education panel before we move forward. Now, the matters that members brought up, now if you remember, I think last March, if memory serves, views have already been expressed, and we already took note of members' views, and members also noted that. So in the final analysis, there will be some sort of amendment taking into consideration members' views. Now, because they are, after all, self-financing, they have to shoulder the funding and to be responsible for its day-to-day running. Now, for requests on their governance or their structure or different stakeholders' participation, now we have to understand that they will not be exactly the same as the UGC-funded counterparts. Now, but a sound governance is something that we definitely require. Now, you've asked about allowing more stakeholders to take part. Now, we will hope to introduce such requirements in the legislation. Mr. Ip, Madam Chair, now the paper talked about revamping the CSPE as well as a startup grant. Now, for the CSPE sector, this is a very important move. Now, the changes in the law, now we do have some strong expectation, so we hope that after amending the two caps, we will see some real progress. Now, I'd like to look at the CSPE revamping. Now, for self-financing institutions, now the paper does have very high expectations to revamp it so that it is almost comparable to the UGC and reaching out to even non-local members, and then their honorarium or remuneration would be comparable to UGC's counterpart. So this is a big change. Now, but no matter what, it is still a self-financing sector. So the government subsidy level is very, very low, and the degree or extent of intervention will not be as much as the UGC counterpart. So my question is, now this CSPE, after its revamping, will it be run in the same way as UGC or different? And if we go back to this non-local members, the remuneration, for example, and should it be on a par with the UGC non-local members, or should it be defined or delineated more clearly? The non-local members, after coming to Hong Kong, let's say the frequency or the number of days spent in Hong Kong, and are they really comparable to their UGC counterparts or very similar to them? Because that should affect the rate of the remuneration. Because if the workload is not comparable, then the remuneration rate should also be adjusted accordingly. Now, I'm not trying to be mean here. I just want to know, now, the CSPE, is it being run in the same way as UGC, or is it different? Now, there are some basic differences, of course. Now, the UGC is a body through which the government assigned more than $20 billion to distribute to the 8 universities funded by the UGC. And it has its own structure to be accountable. Now, the university, after getting the money, would be held accountable. And the university going to the FC for funding would have to go through UGC. So it is, in this sense, very different from the CSPE. Now, I'll be brief. Now, the non-local members, they're university vice-chancellors or professors. Now, the advice they give to the government, the expectation is similar, because even within the UGC, we do not ask those non-local members to do the day-to-day work. They have a huge secretariat to help. Now it's my turn. Now, on the remuneration, I have nothing to add. But for the other funding, I do have views. Now, you have some sort of a subsidy. Now, because we do not have enough information. Now, let me just ask this basic question. Now, the self-financing, since 2009, when Donald Tsang proposed this self-financing as some sort of a sector, and we may have a Catholic university. Now, I don't think this is the right thing. Because education should not be profit-making as its aim. Now, in paragraph 4, you are assigning a lot of money and to them, giving them land and so on. and the students have $30,000 of support. And if you extend this to the self-financing sector, you already have raised a lot. And Mr. Ip's letter, of course, thinks that this is not enough and they're asking for more. Now, if that is the case, it is not really self-financing. It is almost half subvented or half sponsored. And then how many students are there altogether? Some only have about 40 students, and maybe added to 80. Some have a little bit more than 100, even fewer than a secondary school. It is only a very mini university. How can they survive? Now, Mr. Anthony Cheung's report, last March, we discussed that, and the government accepted it. Some of the self-financing universities, they have to be deregistered because they cannot continue. Now, can you agree that these so-called self-financing units cannot survive by continuous subvention from the government? Now, I'm against subventing them, those that are failures.
第四段裏
Now, in paragraph 4, what we mentioned, these are not recurrent funding. For instance, they will need to have premises, and we think that's to be agreed, so we will provide the land, and there's open tendering, and that's one-off. And for the $1.26 billion, now if they offer programs that are needed by society and it's part of their own development, and if they need some startup funding, we will just give it to them on a one-off basis, and then they take care of it by themselves. And we also look at a mechanism for those who cannot follow up, who cannot fulfill their promises. We may even cancel the program or even the registration. So this was a safeguard that was passed in March last year. Now, I have read Dr. Anthony Cheung's report, and it was discussed in this panel. Now, at the time, Helena Wong was very knowledgeable about it. Several batches of institutions competed for it. First, there are the community colleges of the 8 UGC-funded institutions, and then the conclusion by Dr. Cheung was that there's a strategic division of labor, and then there should be meeting of society's needs. So, for instance, there are not enough physical occupational therapists, and they should train them. Now, as for which projects would we haven't come to the stage where we invite institutions to submit their applications. We hope to get the funding from the Finance Committee, and then through this panel, we will receive projects. Through this committee, we will receive projects from different schools sponsoring bodies. And then we will vet the proposals. Claudia Mo. Sorry, I'm a bit confused. Now, this is a request for funding. Originally, the affiliated institutions, those affiliated with the UGC-funded universities. Now, this has got nothing to them, right? That's correct. Now, as for overseas experts being paid, I don't think there's a problem. But as for local members, $215 per meeting, now that's seems now that's very piecemeal or very minor. So you might even incur higher administrative cost than the $215. Now, on the programs that they offer, would it be programs that Hong Kong do not have? For instance, the design of electronic games, and then in 2019, the healthcare professions were in strong demand. So would you have bottom line in your consideration? And it's supposed to be self-financing, but they are now offered public subsidies. Now, would these organizations be under pressure to raise the standards for admission? Now, for the self-financing post-secondary sector, we hope that each of the institutions in their own development strategy should focus on a particular or certain particular fields. So they shouldn't try to cover everything, right? Yes. They should look at their own strengths and their own plans for development. Maybe some should focus on healthcare, some should focus on computer technology, and then given that broad framework, they will take into account the market's needs, and then they will provide us with a detailed proposal. Now, for certain programs or curriculum, they may not require a lot of startup costs. They may not require a lot of equipment, expensive equipment, so they may not come to us for funding. But for healthcare, they may need expensive equipment. If we don't provide them with some of the funding, they would have difficulty to start the program, or they may have to charge the students very high fees. So if they start the program and if they need one-off purchases of expensive equipment, this government fund would provide them with the funding so that they can provide the needed program needed by society, and so that the students don't have to pay high fees. So we don't know yet what types of projects or programs would be offered. So this depends on the institutions. And when the vetting committee looks at it, we will look at the demand in the market and other relevant factors. Next, Mr. Chen Chi-chun. I basically support the government funding for the institutions to offer more programs so that the students have greater choice and pay lower fees. I even think the government should offer funding for full-time publicly funded programs because this year some of the students were adversely affected by the COVID epidemic. Now, it says that there would be $42 million per project if they should apply. They apply by the end of this year, and they apply once each year. So there doesn't seem to be any fixed plan. So it would be 30 per year. Now, if it seems that this is very passive. You have the funds available. You don't have any directions in mind. You just let the institutions and the market decide. So when you introduced this scheme, do you have some ideas yourself? Do you have some priorities for subvention? Or are you totally passive? You want them to undertake market research in the coming months? Or is it that you want them to provide market research support for the programs that they wish to start, so that they can meet your criteria? for the $42 million. You seem to be directionless. You don't have your position. You leave it to the committee to work it out in the next few months. Now, you, the secretary, now firstly, in the university funding plan every 3 years, now we do analyze the demand for talents in the coming years, and we discuss this with the self-financing sector, and we take into account our plans for technological development, logistics, healthcare, and all along we do discuss with the sector, but we won't have our hands tied to them, to a certain number of fields. Now we let the institutions take the initiative to take into account their own plans for development. Now, we do have in mind the needs of society where there's a shortage of talents. So we talk to the institutions and discuss with them their proposals. Now, when this comes to Finance Committee, we will not make clear that we will not restrict them. If there are more applicants, then the proposals are mature, you will approve them. Now, you do not expect the funds to be fully utilized. Now, if people tell us, oh, this program is very popular, we might be worried that there's oversupply, and we will be selective, so we won't just provide funding for the most popular projects. Dr. Fernando Cheung, this is a mini university grants committee for the self-financing post-secondary sector. Now, the $1.26 billion is non-recurrent, it's one-off, for them to start some new programs, like undergraduate programs. They will be revamped. Committee for Self-Financing Post-Secondary Education. It will have several subcommittees. Basically, I'm supportive, but my basic stance is that Hong Kong has all along had the ability to provide free education for all young persons who wish to go for tertiary education. We went to Finland, and this is available in Finland and in many other developed economies around the world. Now, for the 8 UGC-funded universities, they already have funded, government-funded curricula, and they have their own funded, the curricula funded by themselves. But the UGC universities may not cover everything. So for the self-financing sector, they do have scope for development. Now, this is a full-time undergraduate program. I don't know whether it covers part-time programs or articulating programs. So I think those may be overlooked. Now, in the past, say for social workers, quite a number of social workers. They studied for the high diploma. They want to articulate to undergraduate programs, or at least get a sub-degree. But now the 8 UGC-funded universities are not offering that. The cost is relatively high. So these top-up degrees or part-time degrees are not really being offered anymore by the universities. I don't know whether the self-financing sector would do that. Now, I think we must be people-based. So I don't know whether you're open to that. Now for the UGC, for every 3 years, is $60 billion. And so this $1.26 billion is minuscule compared to that. Now for the self-financing post-secondary sector, now in the past you have seed fund of over $3 billion, but they might have some basic needs that you need to support.
Now, simply put, as of today, we do not give recurrent subsidy to them. So this time, we are talking about a startup grant. They may need a bigger amount. They can come to us for application. Because we support the program, the facilities, for example, and if they have students who are part-timers or who are full-time students, then we will not stop them. So we look at the program and the kind of needs that they have. Yes, what about articulation programs? Well, we have to look at them, look at their proposals. If it is, let's say, a bachelor's degree together with some sort of articulation or top-up programs, if the hardware is there, we will not stop them. But what about other expenses? Now, we are not giving them any recurrent expenditure. Now, to call it self-financing and to ask us for funding, it is a misnomer. Now, because some really cannot sustain with only 100-odd students. Mr. Siu, now as to how the standing can be increased, I support it. Now, in paragraph 12 of the paper, now my understanding is that the direction and then the programs will also be let the institutions to decide. But here you basically will support two which are highly in demand, which are vocational and professional. So for example, information technology, logistics, creative industries, and then other programs such as, let's say, allied health programs. So this is a very clear, detailed list. Now, that is fine, I agree. Now, these two big areas, vocational and professional education and training programs, now, under the 8 UGC-funded institutions, they already have such programs. So what is the distinction? And students, of course, will choose the UGC-funded programs and not the self-financing ones. And then if the direction is to develop self-financing programs into vocational and professional areas. Now, if you look at the counterparts in other countries, now for vocational education, it is housed within a normal institution. And then for vocational, they would have some sort of internship and some sort of training. so that they have better recognition. So if you want to do this, vocational education, that is, or whether degree programs with strong professional orientation, you need a lot of internship positions. So is it something that you are thinking about, or will encourage institutions to develop in these areas? Now, for vocational and professional education, it is true that we have to, we are working harder on these areas. Now, in the education panel, we also look at the future development of these two areas, and we're going to give you a paper to allow members to comment. Now, of course, on strong or degree programs with professional orientation or vocational nature, which requires a sort of a hands-on approach rather than just attending lectures. Now, we need to strike a balance somewhere. Now, we have to help the institutions to develop such programs and to involve the various traits before we can have something that meets the needs of society. And next month, we're going to discuss this here. Now, in our paper, we expect these programs are more in demand. Now, but as to which particular area or specific area, we may have some sort of a rough idea. But it is for the institutions themselves to have the incentive to actually give us the program. Now, for competition with the UGC-funded universities, now this is a long-standing thing. So we want the self-financing institutions to find their own niche areas so that they can compete or supplement the UGC-funded ones. Now, I have drawn a line. I'm sorry. Now, we will not have a second round because I have drawn a line, so my apologies to that. Now, I have to ask members whether you agree to give this forward to the FC. Now, I have reservation. I want the Education Bureau to give me more in writing, so I have reservation here. Do you agree that for this to move forward? Yes, okay, right. So let's move forward now to provide interest-free loans to 4 non-profit-making international schools. Now, this is the second time we look at this, and we voted but lost by only 1 vote, and we received a lot of letters in supporting this, and some have been given to members already, some from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and also the chief, the Canadian Embassy supporting the CAIS. And can I ask Mr. Yeung, why come to us again so quickly? What is the urgency? Now, in the last meeting, now who wants to ask questions, please press the button. Now, we have submitted to members a paper listing the 4 schools, and we have now you have provided us with questions, and we have responded to them, at least partially. Now, I just want to reiterate a couple of points. Now, international schools for international cities such as Hong Kong to cater to the needs of non-local families or those coming to us to work or to live. The provision of international schools is very important, allowing us to attract overseas talents to Hong Kong so that Hong Kong can continue to be an international financial hub. Now, our policy is that if there's a shortage of such international school places, we will provide land or vacant schools to these school operating bodies or school sponsoring bodies to apply and to bid. Now, we are now first of all talking about land. Now, they need funding, and because they cannot use the land as some sort of a mortgage or collateral, so we have proposed to give them some sort of a start-up loan so they can continue. Now, usually, after getting our approval, they would have some sort of a bridging loan already, and they can use our funding to repay, so saving them some interest. And the money so saved would help with the school's development and benefiting the students. Now, for charges and so on, we have some sort of mechanism to monitor them. Now, the four we have today, they have to meet our legal requirements, as well as the service agreement that we signed with them, including ratio of non-local students, provision of bursaries, scholarships, as well as an annual audited accounts, and also how the details of the expenditure. And if there's anything irregular, we can stop the service agreement or even take back the school premises. Now, you understand that with the new coronavirus pandemic, everyone is affected, including international schools. And some non-local students have left, and they have difficulty recruiting students. So they are facing financial difficulty. So we hope to have your support so that these loans can be submitted to FC for approval. That's all from me. Now, we have 9 members, starting with Mr. Tong Li Jie, Yip Kin Yun, Chu Hoi Date, myself, Hon Kwok-kwan, Dr. Wong, Dr. Fernando Cheung, Dr. Jiang Lai Wan, and Jeremy Tam. Now, I have to draw a line here. So first of all, Mr. Tong Li Jie, 3 minutes, please. I'll just be brief. Now, on the diverse development of education, I don't object because we are international city. Now, in the paper, when you allocate land, you have made a commitment to provide interest-free loans, but all 4 schools have been built. They already have some sort of loans already, and why come to us so late? Because asking us for funding, it is interest-free, but if they get some sort of bridging loan or from commercial sectors, they have to pay interest. So I'd like to know more. And then now, secondly, all 4 schools are now completed, and have they used up all the premises? Now, because the number of students would have an impact on the loan amount. Now, have you checked how many students they've recruited, and also the standard of the school? So I mean, comparable to government-built schools. So I'd like to know a little bit more. And then you talk about the pandemic. Will there be many non-local students leaving Hong Kong and not coming back in the near future? Now, for the procedures, now because the policy all along is to provide land and to help them apply for a loan in the FC or through the FC to allow them to have a standard school based on the number of students. Of course, they may build many more facilities, but we will give them the standard amount. They may raise funds. They would build the premises first and then recruit students. And at this stage, we will look at them, whether they are functioning, whether they have done the basic work, they are able to recruit a correct ratio of students, and then developing in the right direction. So we consider those to assess the application for loans, because they would have already got some sort of loan. So what they usually do is to get interest-free loans from the government to repay the bridging loans. So in a way, we are helping them. For pandemic situation, we really don't know whether non-local students will come back, because the pandemic affects the whole world. Do you know how much they use to build the premises? Yes. Now, for each of them, the amount they use exceeds the amount they're asking for us, because their school's provision is better equipped than the standard school.
咁啊，下一
Next, Yip Tin Yun, Vice Chairman. Now, the funding for international schools. Now, I support the policy towards international schools. Hong Kong is an international city. We need international schools to cater to the needs of overseas personnel, the needs for the children to be educated. Now, why is the funding so late? So they may have already paid expensive interest for several years for the bridging loans. Now, would it have been better if funding has been sought earlier? Now, last time I sent a letter to this panel, and an important concern is that in the past there were cases where it seems some international schools the finances were effected through the parent companies, which might be profit-seeking. And they may also have shifted out some money, transferred some money by virtue of some service agreements. So how can we ensure that funds would not be transferred out in this way? And the third question, now some schools, quite a few have debentures or capital levies for projects. Some of them are quite large in amount. The government mainly monitors the school fees, but doesn't monitor these levies. Now, we talk to some international schools. Now, of course, they need funding for building the schools, but after the schools are built, can the cost be reduced? Now, can the Education Bureau monitor on the cost of the projects and the nomination rights and so on? We don't have to make our schools very expensive. Now, for the coming academic year, we will require all private schools to apply to us. Now, in the past, the so-called debentures, they are private financial arrangements between the schools and the parents. And at the time, our thought is that we shouldn't directly participate. But now, many schools have developed many types of levies. So this time, we require that they supply information and that they apply to us. Now, there are different types of levies among the schools right now. Now, in order to meet the needs for these levies, we need time to come up with a vetting or approval procedure. Now, we have established mechanism for application of the recurring costs. For some schools, now they might have services provided from the overseas affiliates, and they do pay them. Now that does happen. For these 4 schools, the percentage is roughly from 1 to 5 or 6%.
要去擔心，但係呢樣嘢
So we are not unduly concerned, but we will monitor the situation. Now, Mr. Yip asked whether they would repatriate their profits to their parent organizations. Now, they are non-profit organizations. They cannot distribute through dividends or bonus the money that they received in Hong Kong to their members. We have a motion by Dennis Kwok. I have distributed to you, and we will have to allow time to deal with that. Next, Chu Hoi Dik. 3 short questions. Now, this sounds similar to the Ocean Park. You borrowed privately, and then the secretary says there is a mechanism, and then the government provides an interest-free loan. The repayment period is long so that they can cover some of the funding gap. So business has been poor. So if they don't have the ability to repay, what would the government do? And the government, in responding to Mr. Yip Kin Yun's questions, mentioned that these 4 schools in 2019 to 20 non-local student percentage in one case is under 50%. It's about 50%. That's lower than the government requirement of 70%. So they are all fairly close or lower than 70%. So there may be a significant shortfall. So the Secretary, can you explain? And also, I have a major query about international schools. When they enroll local students, the Education Bureau says that we offer them a lot of flexibility in enrolling local students because the government is providing claims the rationale that because of family backgrounds of these students, they have these needs. Now, these are aristocratic schools. These are schools for wealthy people. I think that's not acceptable. Our support for international schools is transparent. In some cases, we will grant land. If they use the land to build premises, we have an interest-free loan scheme. Of course, this requires the support of the Finance Committee. So the application is not to just plug a gap. Now, they knew all along there's such a scheme. They knew there's the need. They borrowed on the basis of need, on whether they can attain the percentage. Now, in the short term, different international schools may have some difficulty, but we are looking at the longer term. Maybe they may not attain the target within the first or second year. We allow them a few years for them to reach the percentage in the tendering exercise. Of course, the pandemic does impact them, so we will try to get the funding for them as soon as possible. Now, in the loan agreement, there's a mechanism for us to get back the money if they have difficulty, and we can even take over the premises and other assets. Another member's motion, I believe that's from Dr. Fernando Cheung. I have provided that to members as well. I'd like to remind you now there are monetary issues involved. So according to Rule of Procedure 83A, if you have any direct or indirect fiduciary interest, on these items, please disclose the nature before you speak. Now, there are 4 applications. First, the Christian Alliance International School. This is a matter of concern to the Canadian Consulate and Chamber of Commerce. They promote the Alberta curriculum. They say there's a high standard. Now, Mr. Yip Kin Yun praises the Finnish model. Now, and the French International School, does it teach the French curriculum or operate the French system? And Shrewsbury, now, why is it so popular? Now, Shrewsbury and the Malvern College, they mainly follow the UK curriculum. They are affiliated to UK schools. Now, for a comparison of curricula, now this is rather difficult because the schools have different backgrounds. Now, every curriculum has its own pros and cons. Now, under our system, we provide the land in a tendering exercise for schools, sponsoring bodies, so long as they meet the accreditation criteria in a certain jurisdiction. And then we examine the quality of teaching. And as for, say, whether they can attract enough students, then it depends, for instance, on how many Canadians are working in Hong Kong and they wish to there's children to undertake a Canadian or Alberta curriculum, or it depends on how many locals want to study in future in Canada. Now, if people, so it depends on the demand. Now, from the French International School, is it the 4th? I presume they teach in French. They have courses in French. and also some international courses. So for the Alberta curriculum, it says it's of a high level. Now, is it in French or English? To my understanding, it's mainly in English. Can you tell us later, provide more information on the Alberta curriculum? Next, Mr. Shuka Chen. Now, looking at the information, I note that in 2012, on 3rd of December, in the education panel, they discussed this item. Now, at the time, the issue was uneven distribution of places among international schools. Now, for these expansions involving the 4 schools, how does it help to resolve the uneven distribution of places? Now, at the time when we discussed this in 2012, there was economic downturn. We had to attract international capital. So international schools would provide us with that advantage. Now, you apply the same logic in today's document, but there is some difference. Now, apart from the epidemic, now also we now have the approaching introduction of national security law. So Standard & Poor says that it might lower the rating for Hong Kong, and then some foreign institutions might withdraw from foreign companies may withdraw from Hong Kong, and so there may be a reduction in demand for international school places. In paragraph 7 of the document, the administration says that the epidemic does cause students to leave given the epidemic. So when all these issues involve, on what basis does the administration explain that the enrollment of the 4 schools would not be affected, that they will have the money ability to repay?
Mr. Young, now a few years ago, when we assigned the land or premises to these 4 schools, we have made a study on the number of international school places, and there was a shortage of 4,500. And because of that, we earmarked several pieces of land for bidding. So these schools are now accepting students, admitting students. Now this pandemic is giving them difficulty in recruiting students. But is this short-term or long-term? We have to spend more time to look at it. Now, because they are self-financing, if, as member says, many students leave, but I don't really believe that. Now, if they do not have enough students, they would have to close the school, and the land and their premises will be subject to what we agreed initially. Dr. Wong, yes, we are a bit worried about the demand for such international school places, because it's not just the pandemic but also the political climate, the lack of stability. Now, if the demand should go down, then my question is, now, non-local students take up about 74%, and local ones about 26%. Now, this ratio, is it based on the current ratio? Now, if the non-local students were to drop, will you adjust the ratio so that more local students can be admitted? And of course, they may have come from different economic strata. They may not have enough means to pay the high tuition fees, and so requiring more scholarships. So will these provisions fluctuate based on the needs of the non-local students and local students? Now, if you look at the various international schools, now in the past, the older ones do not have such requirements. Now we are looking at those built after 2007 or after 2009 to be exact, and we have this 70% requirement, and this is written in our service agreement with the school providers. So normally they would have to abide by such a figure, and if they fail to do so, we will have to look at the reasons. Now, if members, as members said, if there is a lack of such a lack of demand for such international places, well, as government, we will have to decide whether such provision is still warranted. Now, but at this stage, I cannot see there is a long-term shortfall in demand, or there won't be overseas people coming to Hong Kong to do business. I cannot see that coming. Now, rather, we are looking at the whole macro situation. Now, what about now non-local? Does it mean overseas or mainland China? Now, the absolute majority are non-mainland Chinese students, and I believe it is very unlikely for students in the mainland to come to Hong Kong to study. So they all have overseas passports. Dr. Fernando Cheung. Now, these appear to me to be elitist schools, and how they look at their debentures, you're talking about almost 500,000. And we are now using public funds to give them interest-free loans. Now, we have to think whether this money is worth spending and meet our criteria. Now, there are friends or so-called expatriates coming to Hong Kong to work. If they have physically disabled children, they cannot find English-speaking schools. Now, if you look at all these international schools, there's only one, Sarawak, which admit such students with special education needs. And these four in question do not have plans to admit such so-called SEN students. And this erodes our competitiveness. Now, many overseas talents shy away from Hong Kong because of this, or having come here because they cannot really get an education chance for their children, they decide to leave. I am aware of such, and I've been following up on these cases. So this is really serious. And even those who are already here, I mean the net teachers, for example, their pay is not really that high, but then they want their children to go into English-speaking schools. But it's not easy because they cannot afford it. Now, these elitist schools charge really exorbitant debentures. Now, we're giving them interest-free loans. I think we should ask them to provide chances for the people that I just mentioned, or even the ethnic minorities in Hong Kong. They do not have high income and can only choose local schools. Of course, local schools are not bad, but then if they want to go to English-speaking schools, we should give them a chance, and not to deprive them of such chance because of lack of means. Now, I think you should consider such needs when we are spending public funds, so we can ask the 4 schools in question or other international schools to follow in this direction. Mr. Yeung, now, every school will set aside 10% of their income to be scholarships or sponsorships to help families with lack of means. So such help is available. Now for SEN students, now I know schools have plans to help them. And of course, looking at the degree of their disability, that varies. Some can do it, some cannot. But as far as I know, schools do not have a policy of barring certain students from joining their schools. Chair, can you please ask Mr. Yeung to provide the scholarship details? How many scholarships have they actually paid out? How many students benefited? And then for these integrated education, they are not direct subsidy schools, okay? But under the education policy, they should be so included. Now, we really should end by 12:45, but there are 2 members about to speak, and there's still 1 agenda item, and I will extend the meeting to 1 o'clock. And the next member is Dr. Jiang Lai-wan. Now, can I ask Mr. Yeung, now we have given out interest-free loans to schools. Now, how many schools still owe us money and they haven't repaid, and how many have repaid, and what is their repayment period? Mr. Yeung? Now, apart from these 4, we have another 3 owing us money, and the repayment period is 10 years across the board. Now, recently, because of the pandemic, we have allowed them a grace period of 2 years. So these 3 schools will have another 2 years. Yes, they are paying, yes, pro rata, yes. Like the coming 2 years, we do not want ask them to repay because of the pandemic situation. Okay, they ask us for loans, and then they admit students, they also charge them debentures. Now, is there any guarantee if the schools were to close down, what happens to the debentures? They would all be forfeited. And what about the money that we lend to them? Would taxpayers lose out? Now, in our service agreement with them, Madam Chair, we have built-in safeguards. For example, their assets. But what assets do you have? They already have, the land is yours. No, they have facilities and equipment. But the land belongs to you. But we're going to take back the land, but then the school premises and the facilities, equipment, but they are not valuables. You have to understand, the amount we loan is less than the amount they use to build the premises. So if we take back the premises, now that differs from one to another. Now, one, for example, we lend them 500 million, but then the worth is 600 million. Some we lend them 300 million, but then it's worth 600 million. Now, from past experience, looking at their operation, we are confident that they can continue operating. And should anything happen, our finances are protected. Mr. Tam, what happens to Mr. Ip's point? Well, I'm not insisting that I speak now, but there are some AOBs, and that Mr. Ip's item will be postponed. I see. Okay, because I missed that. Yes. I told Mr. Ip already. He's on my right. Yes.
個 item 第5個 item 講唔到。
So we will not be able to cover item number 5, Mr. Tamanho. I will declare interest. My children or my child studies a group that's the same as CAIS. Now, I don't know why it's voted down last time. Maybe it's the debenture issue. The supplementary information didn't mention that. I don't know whether you are ignorant about it or you don't want to talk about it. Just provide some information for the 4 schools. For instance, the French International School debenture is $90,000. It's not too expensive, but for the others, for instance, Shrewsbury, 200,000 or 300,000, depending on the priority you want. CIS, $560,000. Melbourne, there's no information on the internet. You ask me and I will tell you. Now, this is totally untransparent. This debenture system, is it reasonable? And then you have the project levy. That cannot be recovered. It can be very high. For instance, Melbourne, for primary 1, the school fee is about $170,000. The project levy is $42,000. That is 1/4 of the school fee. Now, for Shrewsbury, $177,000. The school fees of the project levy is $50,000, almost 1/3. Now, the Education Bureau has a part in approving this. Now, you have some oversight on the amount, but on the debentures and the project levies, you say last time that this is the agreement, this is agreed between the school and the parents, so you don't oversee that. Now, for people from overseas, they may not have the money to buy these expenditures. They may have high income, but they may not have that much savings. So will the Education Bureau review this strategy so that it will oversee the debentures and the project levies? Now, they just convert some of their charges into project levies. Can you sign agreements with these 4 schools so that when they receive government funding, they will reduce the debentures and project levies? For the 4 schools who are now applying for funding, now, in our reply to Mr. Yip Kin Yuen, now we stated that in Annex 3.
國際學校嘅一啲
Now we are working on the other levies by the international schools. As I mentioned, in the school year 2020 to 21, for instance, they are required to submit to the Education Bureau for approval. But please understand, for these international schools, they have operated over the years. They are different among themselves. Now, how they use the money from the debentures or project levies, they differ also. Some go into the project, some go into future maintenance. So we have to discuss in detail with each school. So we are commencing a procedure for appropriate regulation. Now, we need time to find out and reach conclusions about the individual detailed arrangements. So we can tell Mr. Tam that we will be looking at this, and we will hope to have a uniform vetting set of criteria in the future. We have two motions to deal with this, one from Dennis Kwok. Mr. Chang, yes? Now, first I rule that this motion is related to our item of agenda, so we have to deal with this. We have to vote to see whether we deal with this. Mr. Kwok has deleted two words. Please read it. So, division is claimed. Now, we urge the administration in providing interest-free startup loans to non-profit international schools, introduce a requirement for upper limit to the levies so that the school fees, debentures, nomination rights, and project levies are regulated to prevent overcharging to parents so that families of different financial backgrounds can receive quality international school education. We also urge the Education Bureau to have a comprehensive review in its policies towards international schools so that the schools do not become overly elitist. Division is claimed. Oh, division bell is not required. Okay, we have division bell.
鄭議員，
我想問清楚，
Mr. Chang, we are voting on whether to deal with the motion. Yes. Please get ready to vote. Please be seated. Please proceed to vote. The results are. Please verify your vote. Voting stops. The results are displayed. 14 for, 4 against. I declare the motion is passed that we will deal with this. Now we are going to vote on this motion. There are 5 crosses, but the lights are out. Can we display the voting results again? Can we display the voting results again? The crosses are red. My apologies. Sorry. Let's proceed. Okay. So the majority are in favor of dealing with this, so we have to vote on this motion. But it's now close to 1 o'clock. We still have one more motion, and we also have to deal with whether the motion is to be forwarded, whether documents to be forwarded to Finance Committee. Can we add 15 minutes? Or we will end as soon as this item is closed, so on a soon as possible basis. So maybe there should be no need for the division bell. So we can vote on this motion. We are in support. There's one more issue. There's another ad hoc motion. We will deal with that, of course. But if we're going to ring the division bell, how can we deal with this? We do not have to ring the division bell, but it can be. But some member might ask for the division bell to be rung. Please have some respect when I am speaking. If we agree, we extend the meeting by 15 minutes or until this item is dealt with. If we finish with this item, then we will end. So we are voting on Mr. Dennis Kwok's motion. Please press the bell. No need to ring. Please press the button. Have you voted? The results are displayed. 12 for, 0 against, 5 abstentions. I declare Mr. Kwok's motion passed. So it will be handed to the Education Bureau for handling. Next, Dr. Fernando Cheung's motion. This panel urges the administration to impose the criterion for the interest-free loans that the schools must provide integrated education for students with special education needs, so that the students don't fail to receive education just because of their disabilities, and there also should be sufficient scholarships. So we have to first vote on whether to deal with this motion. So we will have a vote.
No need for the bell. Now please check, and then we can stop the vote. Display, yes, 15 in favor, 4 against, no abstention. So the motion is passed, and it will be handled or followed up on. So now those in favor of Fernando Cheung's, please vote. Please check, and I will display 15 in favor, 2 objections, no abstentions. So this will be passed on to the Education Bureau. And now we have to go back to this international schools paper. Do you support passing this on to the FC? Mr. Tam? Now last time it was because of the debenture, and we objected to this. So can the Secretary agree that this will be dealt with? Yes, Mr. Young agreed to be this will be dealt with. Okay, so we have consensus here. This will pass on to the FC, and declare the meeting adjourned.